Hello, and thanks for coming back for part 3 of the building fireball tool style tube vise. If you haven't seen the first two videos, there's a link in the description for those. Now, I do apologize for the last video. I did mention at the beginning we were going to make a swivel base for the vise here, but the other parts took quite a bit of time, and I know that the swivel base is going to be another 30-40 minute video probably to build all the parts for it, so it just would have made part 2 too long, so I sort of cut that a little bit shorter, and we put the swivel base into this video. So I've got a kind of a plan here on how it's going to work, and this is sort of based on a swivel base that one of the other YouTubers made, and you know, those links are in the description as well. So one of the guys had built the whole vise and swivel base, you know, without a mill and a lathe, and as I said in the last video, you know, I mean, he did a very good job just by using basic tools. So the swivel base sort of has three parts. So here's the vise at the top. So we're looking, it's a cross section looking straight on. There's the front of the vise there with the nut, and there's sort of three parts. There's two plates, number 3 and number 2, and there's the base, which is kind of the shaded bit. I don't know how clear this is on the video. I might be able to zoom it in maybe. How it works is these two plates are the same, and they're held together by 2 bolts that go through. So there's a thread in the bottom one and just through hole in the top one. And these are kind of, you know, those clamps that you can tighten down and lift up, and sort of like a ratchet clamp. I'm not really sure what they call those things, but that's typically what they use for swivel bases on vices, so that you can loosen them off, move the vise around to where you want, and then tighten them up. So those two pieces are the same, pretty much identical, and they have this angle on them here and here. I think it's about 45 degrees. So at both, you know, this is round, so it's got a chamfer all the way around 45 degrees on both of them. And how it works is there's a chamfer in here on the base that gets bolted to the bench, and when you squeeze these two plates together, they contact on these chamfers, and that locks the whole swivel part together, and it doesn't move anymore. So the plan is to make these two bits out of 10mm steel, which is what I have here, and the base part will be made out of a bit of 16mm or 5/8 solid round bar, and that's sort of bent into a circle, and then you have a plate, one of these plates at the top and one at the bottom, and that chamfer sort of registers on this round bar. The guy on YouTube, he actually put some sandpaper on here and sort of lapped it in to give it, you know, because the round bar is round and it probably wouldn't grip too well. So he sort of lapped it in, and it made the sort of flats line up, and they were able to grip onto that bar quite tightly. So that's the sort of the plan. And I've drawn up basically the size of these two plates that I need. So these are thick lines here that you can see is this part here, and this part gets welded to the top plate here. So I had to make the size of this plate in relation to the length of this part here, if that makes sense. If it was too small, then the plate would stop here and here. And if it was too big, then it's you know, a really big piece of steel that you have to work with. There's some bolt holes here. So this is the hand clamps that go into the plate at the bottom, and that should give us plenty of room on the side here to be able to adjust those around, because they are the ones that you can sort of lift or push and turn around and then get another bite at tightening it up. So this is what I'm going to start off with first, is doing these. I don't think I can get this size in my 4-jaw chuck. It's far too big. So the plan on this would be to probably put a hole in the center, probably a lot bigger than that, and make up some sort of mandrel or mounting bar that I can put in the lathe, so it'll fit into the lathe, and then this plate will be able to bolt to it, and then I can actually turn it and do what I need to do to it. So I think making these plates is the easy part of this build, and it's this bottom base part which bolts to the table, which is going to be the more trickier part to build. So as you saw, I got the tapers turned onto these plates here. So that's a 45-degree taper, and the width of that tape is around about 12 millimeters. So these will go together like that. Let me get this in the vise and maybe we get a better view of it. I've got a little center thing I made up that goes through the middle of both plates, and that sort of keeps them aligned. That won't be there when the swivel base is finished, but it's certainly handy to align things up now while I'm building it. In between here, I mean, this won't be squashed up together like this. There will be a bit of a gap so that when you tighten them up, they're not bottoming out on each other. But for this demonstration, I've just put them in the vise together like that. So the plan was to use a bit of 16mm bar that would sort of fit in there, and it would be bent round into a circle. We'd need to kind of grind in or sand in or something, lap in some flats on both sides of the bar here. At the moment it's just got two very narrow areas where it would be clamped onto those two plates. So if we had more surface area, we get better grip. So yeah, the guy on the video, he lapped them in with some sandpaper and sort of made it that way. Then I was thinking about it, and I had some 16mm square stock, and of course that just fits in there perfect, and there's no need to lap anything or do anything like that because the angles are already there and they're already correct. So if I can bend this square stock around into a circle, then that would work really good for this design, I think, and there would be less work in dealing with any angles or anything later. So the question is, how do I bend the square stock around in a circle? I have a bit of an idea. Before I started building the fireball tool style tube vise, I was working on this bender here. This is a Hosfield number 2 clone, I guess, or homemade bender. And I had to move to the vise because the vise broke when I was trying to bend these legs down the bottom here. So it's probably in a working condition. We just have to make a few things. Here's the idea. So these are the plates. They will work as a bending die because they're the right shape. So I just bore out that hole to fit that. I think that's about a 24mm pin, and that will be the forming die, I think they call it. then in here we make another round die with a V in it, and this is the part that gets dragged around. So the rod will be out here, kind of a long rod or a long piece of square section, and then that gets bent around our big plate in the middle here. So there's those two parts, and then the last part would be to have something in the back here to lock the piece of steel into the into our big die here, or our swivel plate that's on the centerpiece. So that's the idea. Right, well, we're back on to building the parts of the vise now. So let me get you up to speed on how this is going to work. Now, I actually haven't done this before, so it's all sort of theory, but I think it should work and bend the steel like how we want it. So as I mentioned earlier, the swivel base is in here, and that's going to be our die. There's a block here, and that's to hold the steel. It's kind of a anchor point so the steel doesn't move around. And then there's the roller in the back, and that will get rolled around and will bend the steel around this diameter here. So I cut off a piece of steel. I cut it a lot longer than what I needed. I just really don't know how this is gonna work, but this would go something in there like that. Probably go right through. And then that would be anchored here. and then we would pull the lever round. Let me set up and give that a bit of a try. I got the ring bent and welded together. So that actually came out pretty good. It took me a little while though. I'm sort of not used to the bender and how to hold things in there and bend them round and that sort of thing. But I did get there in the end and it came out pretty good. So let me get this together and then we'll talk about the next step. It is a little bit hard to show how this works uh, because the bottom plate is sitting on the table here. But I have had the ring in the vise with the plates in there, and it does spin well, and it does clamp up well as well. So there's no issues with that. So the next step is to continue on with this outside part. So this is the part that will get bolted to the table. And one of the videos the guy was using, I think it was 5mm bar, a little bit like this stuff here, and he welded it round and wrapped it round the outside here. He put a couple of layers on, so it's, you know, probably 10mm or 3/8 thick by the time it's finished. And then after that he made some lugs out the sides here that can be used to bolt this ring and base part to the bench. And then that leaves the center piece, the two big plates here in the middle, free to rotate. So, you know, once you loosen it off, you can rotate your vise around where you want it and then clamp those clamps back up. I've got the vise pretty much finished apart from getting it all painted. And I just want to cover off a few of the issues that I came across while I was making this swivel base. So firstly, I got a bit of distortion on these plates here. And there are some big welds on the other side here, and I kind of half expected it. I did bolt this bottom plate to the top plate to try and reduce the distortion, but there was still distortion nonetheless. And that also pulled distortion into the bottom plate. Not as bad as the top plate, but you know, still had distortion. So for both of them, I had to weld on the other side of where I welded it to this vise, just to you know, pull these edges back up flat. And I got them flat on both the top plate and the bottom plate, so that's good. And that means that our 45 chamfer here is, you know, round again. And to be honest, I don't know really how you can avoid that. Maybe clamping this top plate directly to the table. But I think because the welds are quite big there, and you know, they need to be strong to hold the whole vise and whatever you're putting in the vise, there's going to be some distortion nonetheless. The second issue I had is the square stock that I used inside the, you know, as the ring here. It's not completely round. Now, I don't know if that's because it wasn't completely round from the bending process, or possibly it's got a little bit distorted because I've got some welds in here as well. I'm not sure what the case is, but you know, I mean, there's some, you can see it sort of touching there, and there's a couple of low spots. I did, as you saw, you know, lap it in, or tried to lap it in, but the issue with that is that when you're putting your sandpaper on this base, it makes the diameter larger. So what that means is when I go to lap this in, it's not sitting in the ring here in the correct position, so it's lapping a lot higher up, if that makes sense. So, you know, I'm sort of limited on what I can do to sort that out. And the last issue I had was, I think because the chamfers on these plates, you know, they're only like about 12 millimeters wide. I think they're kind of a narrow chamfer, and I was getting a lot of this type of thing. When you loosened the clamps off, even just a little bit, it sort of rolled around like it was on a pivot. So you got up and down, left and right, all over the place. So the vise, if you can imagine, you know, was doing this type of thing, even if you loosened off the clamps a little bit. So I had to make a modification to the design, and I put this plate in here. And the reason why I'm mentioning this now is because if you're going to build one of these, I was sort of limited on what size plate I could put here for a start, because it needed to be below the surface of, you know, where this base bolts to the table, but it needed to have enough room for the plate, you know, to be able to spin in there as well. So, actual fact, I had to mill about half a mil off this 5mm plate to fit it in there. And how that works now is this goes in from the bottom. So I've offset the plate, you know, sort of offset from the center, so you can slide that in and slide that out, so it's not fixed or captive in there. I've made up this guide or bushing, or I'm not sure what you call it, but you know, it's going to be how the vise can sort of turn on the center, so it's going to stop this sort of movement here. And basically these holes in here, they're about you know, 24 mil, or pretty close to an inch big. So that slides in there, and it also slides in here. Get it into the center. You basically tighten that down. Now, I mean, that rotates around quite nicely, and there's no movement this way and no movement that way. So when I have the vise on the table like this, I get, you know, rotation, very nice, but the vise doesn't sort of go forward and back like it used to. So I think that's kind of a necessary thing that you'd need to do. I mean, you don't have to do it. The vise does slide back and forward like this if you don't have that center alignment piece. But if you get it in the position and clamp it down, then it will actually stay there right on the 45-degree chamfers. So it's pretty much done. The last thing I need to do is just clean it up and paint it. So I'll do that. I might actually re-blue this end part. You know, it's got a little bit scratched and stuff, being dragged around the bench and stuff as I've been fitting things and trying things out. And then the vise will be complete, and I'll be quite happy to have a decent vise attached to my bench here. The little vise was very limited on what you can do in there.